Hello, hello. Welcome back to another edition of Talk About It, a video series where experts and people with lived experiences will discuss issues and topics around substance use disorder. This series was created by Partnership to End Addiction, a national nonprofit that helps families prevent and treat addiction. Partnership to End Addiction provides free, confidential support for families looking for answers for themselves and their loved ones. I am your host, Glozell. Today we will be discussing advocacy, the importance of and why behind it. Back with us today are Bill Williams. Bill Williams is a nationally recognized recovery advocate and host of the radio show Kingfisher Project. Bill started his advocacy efforts in 2012 after losing his son William at age 24. We also have Denise Mariano. Denise Mariano leads family support and advocacy at Partnership to End Addiction. Denise is also part of a family in recovery from addiction. We also have back Ryan Hampton. Ryan Hampton is a nationally recognized recovery advocate, author, and person in long-term recovery from addiction. I'm going to ask all of you to please share with us the different ways we can share stories and why every voice matters, no matter how big or how small, to impact change.
We can share stories as just a first means of getting involved, right? And that could be that doesn't necessarily mean Glozell telling your whole story, but maybe finding that moment in your story, right? And maybe matching that moment to the anger and frustration and energy you have inside to a policy that's failing. So what does that look like? For me, my son was denied insurance for up to 4 years. It's unacceptable. We don't do that for any other medical condition, right? So maybe that's my moment. Or maybe my moment is the lack of family supports. There is no steady funding stream for families, absolutely zero. And why the Partnership to End Addiction is so important. We're so grateful for some of the funding that's coming down to the recovery level, but families aren't included in that level. So again, maybe that's my moment in the story to say, hey, we're suffering too. We feel isolated, hopeless, and so lifting our voice that way. That first advocacy moment can be just retweeting something that you care about. It doesn't have to be this big moment. You could start with baby steps, take it in small bites, and just retweeting something you care about or reposting something.
In my case, and I'm sure this is true for each of you as well, it's not a story. Our story is actually composed of several different stories. About the time our son, 4 days before his final overdose, went on his own to ask to be admitted to inpatient detoxes, was denied by his insurance company as not medically necessary. Another story might be our story about why we donated his body for anatomical research. There are any number of stories that are appropriate in given instances, and they are part of the composite story that we all have to tell.
I think there's those of us who have opted to utilize the means such as social media or mass media or testifying or going and doing more community organizing work around storytelling and that craft of public narrative. But really, when you break it down, you don't have to go to that level. If we look at seismic change in this country and how it's happened, the data, the numbers really favor that the majority of us, I believe, that are impacted by addiction, right? I mean, we know that about 1/3 of households in this country are impacted directly in one way. Indirectly, it's way more than that. But if we just take that 1 in 3 number, what if every family or household that was directly impacted just shared with 2 other people? The storytelling can actually be most powerful when you keep it closest to home, right? If you're able to talk to your employer, if you're able to talk to your neighbor, if you're able to talk to a friend of yours, right, and open their mind and their heart, if we did that at capacity, at level, right? If we did that in mass, I think we would see seismic change in this country overnight.
You need a tough hide to do this a little bit because there are naysayers out there. There are hateful people out there, and they will say the most abominable things. And we need to just have a tough hide to ignore them, to know that they're fools, and we have to disregard the fools to keep sending our message.
I couldn't agree more. And that tough skin is it, and it's actually personal attacks too, right? But when you believe in this mission and you see it come to fruition and you see it touch lives and you see us making change, it's organic that we just ignore the trolls. I'm sorry. It's just our work is so important that we can't take this personally. But for those listening and new to this advocacy, Bill's absolutely right. You have to have that tough skin and just be able to put your head on the pillow at night and be at peace with yourself that you're helping others, right? And just making a huge difference in the world.
These trolls, these bullies, why do you think substance use disorder and addiction and recovery continue to be have that stigma?
I mean, we are rolling back generations of attitudes and culture around people who struggle with addiction, people in recovery from addiction, family members. I mean, rolling back generations of culture and understanding and dialogue and media is a very, very tall order. And I would say that just in the last couple of years, we have made some significant changes. But I mean, we are changing a narrative that has been in place since before I was born, right? And that doesn't happen overnight.
When I think of the media, when I think of the journalists, when I think of the public narrative and the sensationalism, we need to do much better. You could have a powerful story about recovery, but yet they serve it up with an image of a needle and a spoon. I won't share those articles, right? Because to me, you see the image and already you have created or fed this stigma. But we as advocates can make a big difference. We can change that narrative. We can talk about this like any other medical condition. We cannot label people. We have a lot of work to do, but I agree with Ron. We've come somewhat. We're making change, but there's so much more work to be done here.
The narrative won't change unless we speak up and demand for them to change the narrative. And the media, mass media in particular, has created a lot of harm around stigma. Although some of them, I believe it's unintended, and again, it's generational and just the way things have been done. But we have an obligation as advocates to correct them and not feel bad about it.
We talk so much about advocacy. So, how does one get involved in advocacy around this issue?
With me, it started by writing. I wrote something and I liked it. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. And I submitted it to the New York Times and it became an op-ed. People responded to that. People responded to stuff I put on social media. You start reaching contacts. I met Denise that way. Then you meet organizations and people ask you to come and speak. I think how you become involved is saying yes and learning from your own story and your own experience and experiencing how much doing something can affect other people in a positive way.
You know, I think there's so many ways that people can get involved. I would say first and foremost, one of the organizations I trust the most in terms of advocacy would be Partnership to End Addiction, particularly around families. It is hard work, and you really have to pace yourself. My suggestion would always be to start small and see how that develops over time. A lot of us like to look, national and like go change the world at once. But we need to realize that sometimes our voice, our advocacy is needed close to home, right? Because a lot of these decisions impact our community and we can't leave folks who are close to home behind because we're, constantly advocating in Congress or the federal level. I think the state and local level is a really good place for folks to start. But I also would like to say that it is important that when you do this work, right? That you take care of yourself. A lot of people will dive into advocacy as a means of, or in replacement of, their own personal recovery program or their own, personal way of, going through grief or dealing with a family member who is struggling. And that can lead to burnout really quick. You have to have a balance between your advocacy and your self care, and it has been a struggle for me over the years to learn what that balance is and to have the right supports in place. But it is just critical that folks take care of themselves first, and that I take care of myself first before I go out and advocate for others, or else I will be of no use to my community.
I couldn't agree more on that self care factor, because a lot of the advocacy work that we do is triggering, right? We reflect back on the journey, and sometimes it's daunting. What I will say, and excuse me if I'm promoting, but it's why I work at the Partnership to End Addiction. We care about people. We create relationships so that people trust in us. They know that their story and their own self-care and the story of their children and the families that lost matter to us more than that advocacy, right? We're not that organization, and there's too many out there that are predatory. So I think when we think about this advocacy piece, it takes a lot of work and time, but it's so worth it, because those relationships and trust and really knowing someone's story, it just makes a huge difference for us as an organization. And it invites people to come back because they trust us. They know the work that we do, the advocacy, the direct supports, the programs we offer. That's not us like experts in the room doing that. It's the family voice and the experience that comes after it. When we think of advocacy, we have to do two things. We have to leave the ego and agenda at the door. We have to collaborate on a common mission to serve others in recovery and families. And the advocacy also involves the recovery community and family community coming together. We learn more about those in recovery and vice versa. They understand our journey and the stigma and judgment and shame. Very different maybe than them, but very similar. It's how we collaborate with each other. And we know that the two voices coming together is just a more powerful, impactful, loud megaphone. And I can say, Ryan, I can't thank you enough, because you were the first person as a family member that I expressed this to, and he was listening. And now we're working together, and not for me and Ryan, but for the rest of the people in recovery and families. So Ryan, I personally thank you for that. I know we have a new movement, and we'll continue that. So
We have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're definitely stronger as a movement when families and people in recovery are united. We've been splintered for too long. I think that there's been too many silos, and there's just a real opportunity here to do a lot of good for a lot of folks.
I look at Bill and I think of the hundreds of thousands of families that have lost, and their selfless work and how they give back through advocacy. They fill our gas tanks, inspire us to hit that pavement and drive change. We can't do this without those families. Their voice is critically important. And you're the families that really inspire us and fill that gas tank and make us mad and angry and frustrated, and why we don't give up.
Bill, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just add, and we may not think of this, but another part of advocacy is, as an advocate, is a willingness to continue to learn. And by that, I mean reading books, talking to people, trying to understand differing points of view. I feel like I'm a better advocate because I've tried to understand and tried to learn and try to understand what's new in the field.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank you. This has been amazing. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Denise. For more information and resources, visit drugfree.org. I'm your host, Glozell, for Talk About It, a series by Partnership to End Addiction.